The kitchen clock read 6:13 when Margaret Sullivan opened the pantry door and grabbed her grandkid's favorite cereal box. The sky outside was still a deep blue tinged with pink, as if the city were holding its breath before waking up. Through the kitchen window, she could see the lawn damp with dew, spring flowers freshly bloomed and stretching toward the light that had yet to come. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Margaret, as always, had woken up before everyone else. It had always been that way even when she didn't need to. Even now, at 60 years old, with no steady job, no imposed responsibilities, habit or necessity, she no longer knew. The house was spacious, 2 stories, modern, with neutral-toned furniture and a decor that blended functionality and warmth. Photo frames of the kids, souvenirs from trips, colorful paintings chosen by Emily. Margaret had lived there for 2 years, ever since Robert, her husband of 38 years, had passed. He was gone in 5 months. She stayed silent for much longer. "Grandma," a sleepy voice called from the top of the stairs. Ethan, his blonde hair sticking up and wearing dinosaur print pajamas, was coming down slowly. Margaret smiled. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well? I had a dream about a giant glacier, but we were skateboarding on top of it," he said, laughing as he sat at the table. "Skateboarding on a glacier? Now that's some imagination," she said, pouring the cereal with milk. The boy eagerly dipped his spoon into the bowl. Caleb appeared right after, dragging a blue blanket and rubbing his eyes. Margaret picked him up without a word. That was her favorite moment of the day, the warmth of her still drowsy grandson. The smell of his hair, the cozy silence of the house before the chaos. The rest of the morning ran on autopilot. Preparing lunchboxes, supervising outfit changes, packing backpacks, finding the always missing sneaker. All of it under the cool light coming through the ground floor windows, while Emily got ready upstairs in a rush and Michael read emails. On his phone, sitting at the kitchen counter, "Mom, have you seen my navy blue blazer? The one that goes with the tailored pants?" Emily asked, coming down already in heels, coral lipstick on her lips and a black portfolio under her arm. "It's in the laundry room closet. I put it there after it dried yesterday." Margaret answered with the ease of someone who already knew every inch of that house. Emily smiled, still breathless. "What would I do without you?" Margaret just nodded. The compliment came with affection, but also with a hint of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't her house. It wasn't her life. She just filled the spaces between other people's lives. The housekeeper, Lena, arrived at exactly 9 a.m. She was efficient and polite. She took care of the cleaning, lunch, heavy chores. Margaret did the rest. The small, invisible tasks, the ones no one noticed but that, if left undone, threw everything off balance. She was the one who bought the kids' favorite fruits, who changed the fridge filter, who sewed on loose buttons. That afternoon, while putting the groceries away in the cabinet, Margaret paused for a moment. Her hand still held a can of peas. She looked at the spotless kitchen, the shiny floor, the distant sound of the washing machine. It was then that the question came, like an unwanted but inevitable visitor. "And me? Where am I in this story?" She sat slowly at the table, looked at the wall ahead, where a family photo showed everyone smiling in a park. She was in the corner of the picture, smiling mildly, holding Caleb in her arms. In the center, Emily and Michael, arms intertwined with the kids in front. It was a beautiful photo, but it felt like a glass frame. She was in the scene, and at the same time, outside it. She grabbed her mug of tea with both hands as if seeking warmth in the gesture, and looked at the clock. 3:02 p.m., nothing to do until picking the boys up from school. She felt like an antique piece in a modern home, useful but out of place. Later that night, sitting on the couch with Emily, while Michael read stories to the kids, Margaret commented in a low voice, "Today I realized I don't have any new photos of myself. I don't even know when was the last time I bought something just for me." Emily frowned, lowering the volume of the TV. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean, I exist for you guys, and I'm okay with that. but sometimes I wonder who I am now. Widow, grandma, mom. But just that? Emily stayed quiet for a moment. She touched her mother's hand gently. I don't know what to say, but I get it. I mean, I try to get it. You spent your whole life taking care of us. Margaret smiled. And I don't regret it. I just think maybe there's more. I don't know, it's just a feeling. Emily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. If you ever want to do something just for yourself, anything, I support you, okay, Margaret? Didn't answer. But that night, for the first time in a long while, she dreamed. She dreamed she was walking down an unfamiliar street filled with paintings in shop windows, and her hands were stained with paint. When she woke up, the sun was already touching the windows. And for the first time, she didn't get up before everyone else. The day was overcast when Margaret served 2 cups of chamomile tea on the back porch. It was Saturday morning, and the distant sound of cars mingled with the singing of a few stubborn birds that insisted on being heard even without the sun. Emily, in light jeans and a beige sweater, stirred her tea absent-mindedly with a spoon, as if sensing that the conversation would carry extra weight. You seem different, Mom. Is everything okay? She asked, glancing sideways. Margaret took a deep breath. The steam from the cup rose slowly, and she followed its movement as if searching for courage. I've been thinking about some things. For the last few months, actually. What kind of things? She hesitated for a second, then with a steady voice said, I want to change my life, Emily. Emily let the spoon drop into the cup. The soft clink of metal against porcelain was the only sound for a few seconds. What do you mean, Mom? I want to leave here, rent a place of my own, in another city, devote myself to something I've kept on hold for too long. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Are you serious? Very. I've spent the last 40 years of my life taking care of you all. The house, your father, the grandkids, and I'd do it all over again. But now I want to find out what else there is. I want to paint again, teach, feel like I have a purpose that's mine alone. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was deep. Emily brought her hand to her face, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't know you felt that way. Neither did I until recently. But now that I do, I can't ignore it. I can't keep living a life that isn't mine. Emily stood up, knelt in front of her mother, and held her hands. You taught me to be brave, to be a woman, to be a mother. If this is what you want, then go. Go all in, Mom. Go be happy. Margaret smiled, and her eyes filled with tears too. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. The news came as a surprise to the boys. Ethan cried a little. Caleb clung to her neck on the day she left. Michael, always more reserved, wished her luck with a sincere hug. Margaret promised. Visits, phone calls, and weekends together. But deep down, she knew it was time to make room for a new version of herself. The city she chose was Madison, in Wisconsin. Not too far from Chicago, but far enough for everything to be new. It was charming, surrounded by lakes with a vibrant cultural scene and streets that blended old and contemporary in a welcoming harmony. The apartment she rented was on the 3rd floor of an old red brick building, with a modest balcony and large windows that let the sun in without apology. She arrived on a cool spring morning. The janitor, an older man with a white beard named Walter, helped her carry the boxes upstairs. New in town? He asked, smiling. New in everything, actually, she replied, laughing. Margaret spent the first day unpacking slowly. Each item she pulled from a box seemed to gain new meaning there. The brushes stored away for decades. The old wooden easel Robert had given her on a forgotten birthday. The art books, the unopened paints. This wasn't just a change of address. It was a restart. That evening, she sat on the balcony with a glass of cheap wine. The street below was calm, lined with trees whose leaves danced in the light breeze. A group of young people laughed and talked on the sidewalk. A dog barked in the distance, and for the first time, Margaret felt a different kind of silence. Not absence, but freedom. The following week, she signed up as a volunteer to teach basic painting classes at a community school for adults. The place was simple, with white walls and colorful paintings made by the students themselves. The director, an enthusiastic woman named Janet, welcomed her warmly. "We have classes on Wednesdays and Fridays, morning and afternoon. Many of our students are retired. Others are adults who never had the chance to explore art. You'll fit in perfectly here, Margaret." "I've never taught before. I just painted for pleasure," she confessed. "That's exactly what we need. Someone who speaks from the heart, who paints with soul. The rest we learn together." Margaret smiled. For the first time, she felt not just welcome, but needed. On the first day of class, she arrived early. The tables were covered with paper, pencils, tempera paints, worn-out brushes. Slowly, the students began to arrive. An older woman with white hair and a pearl necklace, a shy man with a carpenter's hands, a young woman with alert eyes and a worn-out backpack. She observed them, and suddenly Robert's voice echoed in her memory. "You have eyes that see what no one else sees." She closed her eyes for a second. It didn't hurt. It was a sweet memory now. She picked up a brush, took a deep breath and said, "Good morning. I'm Margaret. I'm not here to teach rules. I'm here to help you find what's hidden inside, because painting is just another way of telling who we are." Some smiled. Others simply nodded. But in the air there was a light electricity, a vibration of beginning. Margaret held the brush firmly. It was the first of many gestures that would lead her back to herself. That night, sitting on the floor of her new apartment, she painted a sunflower in watercolor. It wasn't perfect, but it had soul, and that was everything. The smell of gouache paint mixed with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the next room lingered in the air of room 4 at the community school. Wednesday morning started lazily, with a shy sun trying to filter through the tall windows. Margaret adjusted the cotton scarf tied around her hair and lined up the paint cans on the table, as if it were a silent ritual to calm her heart. It was her third week teaching classes, and although she still felt butterflies with each new group, something was growing inside her, a quiet confidence steady like the brushstrokes she was beginning to see in her students' paintings. "Good morning, my dears," she said with a gentle smile as the first faces began to appear at the door. Linda was the first to enter. She was 68, with short hair dyed burgundy and an easy laugh. She wore floral dresses and talked with her hands as if dancing while telling her life stories. "Margaret, I brought cookies. Lemon lavender, my grandmother's recipe. But I'll only share if you let me paint with a palette knife today," she said, laughing. "Deal," Margaret replied, making space on the table for the glass jar. Then came Carol and Janet, inseparable, friends since they'd lost their husbands within 2 years of each other. Carol was petite, with rounded glasses and a soft voice, while Janet was energetic and always had a new idea up her sleeve. "Are we trying watercolor today?" asked Carol, already placing her glass of water next to her paper pad. "Yes, but don't worry about technique. I want you to paint something that represents what you're feeling right now. No filters," Margaret encouraged. Susan arrived, last as always, out of breath and with her backpack slipping off one shoulder. She was the youngest in the group, 42, recently divorced and still with the tired eyes of someone who had cried too much. But when she held the brush, there was a hopeful delicacy in her strokes. Margaret watched each of them with affection. They were different women, from distant stories, but who now shared silences, paint, and confidences between brush strokes and bursts of laughter. That morning, the room filled with color. There were pastel pinks in Carol's hands, deep blues in Susan's experiments, vibrant spirals in Linda's bold tests. Margaret walked among them, making small comments, but mostly listening. She realized there was more wisdom in letting the art speak than in teaching fixed techniques. During the break, they all sat together on the long bench in the courtyard. The breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. Margaret nibbled on a cookie, while Linda told an absurd story about an old Italian boyfriend who danced poorly and lied well. "But he had the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen, girls. A walking sin," she exclaimed, causing a chorus of laughter. Susan wiped tears of laughter with the back of her hand. "Sometimes I think I'll never laugh like this with a man again," she said in a softer tone. "You don't need to," replied Janet. "Laughing with friends is worth 2 relationships, or 3 if the relationships were bad," added Carol. Margaret smiled. That conversation was a watercolor portrait of what she was feeling: freedom, companionship, lightness. "You know what we should do?" Linda suggested. "Travel, the 5 of us, an art tour, a soul retreat." "You read my mind," said Janet. "I've always dreamed of seeing the colors of Florence, the light in Tuscany, the frescoes in Rome." Susan's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Margaret replied, surprising even herself. Suddenly, that idea became more than an end-of-class joke. It was an invitation to life. Janet pulled a little notebook from her bag and started jotting down destinations. Carol searched for possible dates on her phone. In less than half an hour, they had sketched out an itinerary: 20 days in Italy, visiting Rome, Florence, Siena, and the Amalfi Coast. Museums, wine, cafes, medieval alleys, new colors, deep breaths. On the way home, Margaret felt light. Sky was beginning to paint itself in shades of pink and lilac, as if nature itself knew something new was being born. When she got to her apartment, she turned on the warm light in the living room, hung her coat over the chair, and played soft, instrumental music. She opened her sketchbook and, for the first time in years, began drawing without thinking, without planning, just letting her hands speak. She drew 5 women sitting on a stone staircase, each holding a paintbrush. In the background, an ancient dome, open windows, blue sky, and in the lower right corner she wrote in tiny letters, "The colors of freedom." That night before bed, she sent a message to Emily. "I'm living things I didn't even know were still inside me. Don't worry, I'm okay. I'm whole." And then she turned off the light with a calm smile on her face. Because deep down, she knew she was learning to live with colors that life had left dormant. And now, finally, they were waking up. Venice welcomed them like a living painting. The sky tinged with gold, the canals reflecting liquid light, the sounds of the city mixed with the rustle of the water and the clinking of glasses on terraces by the canals. It was the 5th night of the trip, and Margaret already felt a premature longing for those women with whom she now shared more than paintbrushes. She shared rediscovered dreams. The group walked down a narrow alley after an afternoon full of laughter and art. They had visited the Doge's palace, admired the intricate ceiling of St. Mark's Basilica, and taken dozens of photos in front of ornate bridges. Every step on the ancient stones felt like walking through centuries of stories. And yet, everything seemed new, fresh, as if the city had been made just for them. "Let's have dinner there," said Linda, pointing to a restaurant with outdoor tables and yellow lights hanging from strings stretched between balconies. The sign read, "Trattoria dell'arte," and the aroma escaping from the kitchen was pure invitation. The group settled at a table beside the canal, where gondolas passed slowly and gondoliers sang softly, their glasses filled with white wine. Laughter floated in the air. The conversation revolved around new discoveries, but Margaret, in that moment, simply observed. Her eyes wandered over the lit windows, the flowers hanging from balconies, the dancing reflections in the water. There was something inside her opening up in silence. It wasn't nostalgia, nor complete happiness. It was as if her soul was rearranging itself in a new space she didn't even know existed, a space of her own, where lightness, silence, and possibility could fit. After dessert, they headed back, toward the hotel, but a few meters ahead, Margaret stopped suddenly. "My purse!" she exclaimed, raising her hand to her head. "I left it hanging on the chair." "Want me to go back with you?" asked Susan. No. You all stay here, it's just there, I'll be quick." In a hurry, she turned the corner, her shoes tapping rhythmically on the old stones. When she reached the trattoria, the last table was already being cleared. A kind waiter smiled when he recognized her and pointed inside. She entered. The light was soft and golden, and the sound of cutlery being put away filled the space. Then she saw him, a tall man, neatly combed gray hair, wore a light linen suit and held her purse as if it were a delicate object. His eyes met hers before any words were spoken. It was just seconds, but not ordinary seconds. It was as if something ancient had been remembered, something nameless yet weighty. "Excuse me, That purse is mine," Margaret said, her voice more shaky than she'd like. "I thought so," the man replied with a light Italian accent. His voice was low, deep, with a calmness that touched her. The waiter said a charming lady had forgotten it. "I was curious to meet someone who could forget something like this so gracefully." Margaret smiled, embarrassed. "I'm not usually forgetful. Must have been the dessert." He handed her the purse as if offering a gift. "I'm Lorenzo Bianchi." "Margaret Sullivan." "Sullivan, American?" "Yes, I'm traveling with friends." "A late adventure." "Late?" He raised an eyebrow. "I see nothing late about enjoying life." She laughed, surprised by the ease of the conversation. "I believe you're right." Lorenzo made a courteous gesture with his hand. "May I walk you to the corner? Venice is safe, but the streets do like to confuse hurried feet." They walked side by side under the city's low lights. He had an elegant demeanor, without pretension. He spoke slowly as someone who savors the silence between words. He told her he had lived there since retiring as a publisher in Milan. He was divorced, father of 2 grown children, and grandfather of 4. His eyes lit up when speaking of them. "And you?" he asked. "What's your story, Margaret?" She hesitated for a moment, looked at the sky between rooftops, took a deep breath. "I was a wife for many years, a mother, a grandmother. Now, I'm trying to be just Margaret." He nodded slowly, respecting the space between what she said and what she preferred to keep to herself. "A beautiful quest," he replied. When they reached the corner, her friends were waiting, excited, and the group immediately noticed the man at Margaret's side. "Margaret, you were scaring us to death," said Janet dramatically. "Who's the heartthrob?" Linda whispered, eyes already gleaming. Margaret introduced Lorenzo with a smile she couldn't hide. "He returned my purse and saved me from a panic attack." "Pleasure," he said with a slight bow. "If you'll allow me, I'd be honored to show you Venice through local eyes. I know places that don't appear in the guidebooks." The women exchanged enthusiastic glances. "You're invited to have dinner with us tomorrow," Carol declared without hesitation. Lorenzo accepted with ease, said goodbye with a light touch on Margaret's shoulder, and disappeared down the alley, as if he were part of the city itself. Later at the hotel, while her friends weaved theories and plans, Margaret locked herself on the small terrace of the room, sat by the window and looked out at the night. Her heart felt light, but beating strong. She didn't know what that meeting meant. It wasn't love, not yet. Maybe it would never be. But it was presence, genuine interest, a gaze that truly saw her. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to close her eyes and imagine not only what was to come, but what could come. The morning after the meeting at the restaurant, the soft sunlight entered through the windows of Margaret's small apartment in Venice, illuminating the light-colored walls and her first paintings, still timid, but full of color and hope. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the distant sound of the city's bells and the gentle movement of the waters in the canals. An unexpected message arrived on her phone. It was Lorenzo. With simple words, he invited her for a gondola ride, just the two of them that afternoon. Without thinking twice, Margaret felt her heart race. It was a chance to get to know this man, who in just a few days already occupied an unusual place in her life. When Lorenzo picked her up at the apartment, he greeted her with a wide smile and a gaze that shone brighter than the sun's reflection on the Grand Canal. He was impeccable, wearing a light white linen suit and an aura of calm and power that only true owners of the city possess. "Lorenzo," was the owner of a famous Venetian hotel chain, a man used to commanding, but at that moment he seemed just a travel companion. They got into the gondola, slowly gliding through the main canal. The sky was clear, the intense blue reflected in the dark waters, while the ancient city passed around them like a dream made of stone and water. "I've always thought Venice was magical, but today it seems more alive than ever," said Margaret, feeling the light breeze on her face. "She has her secrets," Lorenzo replied, looking at her with a smile. "And I would like to share some of them with you." As the gondola silently glided, their hands lightly touched, and without Margaret expecting it, Lorenzo gently held her hand. "I wish this moment could last forever," he confessed, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Margaret felt a shiver, a mix of surprise and warmth. She looked into his eyes, saw sincerity, a tenderness she hadn't felt in a long time. "Me too," she replied with a shy smile. In the days that followed, the romance between them blossomed quickly and intensely, like spring that unexpectedly blooms after the harshest winter. Dinners under the stars in small hidden restaurants, walks through quiet alleys where only the sound of footsteps and birds seemed to exist, conversations by the canal's edge where they confessed fears, dreams, and pains. Margaret's friends, despite a hint of surprise, were her biggest supporters. "You deserve this, Mom," Emily said on the phone. "Give yourself to this moment without fear." "I know, daughter," Margaret replied, sometimes with tears in her eyes. "But it's hard not to think about what could go wrong." On the last night, Lorenzo took her to a terrace overlooking the illuminated city. The lights reflected on the canal waters, creating a spectacle of colors and shines that seemed like the work of an inspired painter. "Stay with me," Lorenzo said, holding her hands. "You don't have to decide anything now. Just stay. Come live here, in this city I love, in this life we can build." Margaret felt her chest tighten. The idea of a new life in an unknown city, beside a man who could be both her refuge and her challenge, seemed like a dream and a risk. "I need to think," she replied, her voice trembling. "But thank you, Lorenzo, for everything." They looked at each other for a long time, knowing that this moment was a turning point, the point where life could change completely. In the silence of that night, Margaret felt a spring bloom inside her, vibrant, intense, full of promises, but also doubts. Back in Madison, the routine seemed both familiar and strange to Margaret. The small town with tree-lined streets, cozy cafes, and art galleries exuded a tranquility that comforted her, but also reminded her of the distance now existing between her heart and that piece of the world where, despite everything, she had built a new life. Every morning before leaving for her painting classes, Margaret checked her phone with a contained smile. Lorenzo's messages arrived with the frequency of a ritual. An affectionate "good morning," a photo of a corner lit by a sunset in Venice, a small phrase of affection, as if he tried to shorten the vastness that separated them. "You look amazing in the last photo you sent me," he wrote one morning. She replied, sometimes taking time to find the right words, other times letting the heart emoji speak for her. Besides the messages, there were flowers. Always fresh flowers delivered to her apartment door. Tulips, lilies, roses, each bouquet with a delicate note, simple but full of meaning. "I wish these flowers were a hug from me to you," said one of the letters. In class, Margaret felt alive, as if she had found a lost part of herself again. The students, women and men of all ages, learned from her and also taught her, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. She was the teacher, but at that moment, she seemed more like a learner of life, rediscovering dreams, fears, and courage. Still, Lorenzo's constant presence made her oscillate between enthusiasm and insecurity. She had never experienced anything so intense and spontaneous. She felt young, vibrant, full of possibilities, but at the same time, old, as if all that whirlwind of emotions reminded her of the time that had passed and the choices she had left behind. "Can I allow myself this now?" she asked herself as she painted a portrait of one of the students. Lorenzo, for his part, showed a patient and respectful love. He knew he couldn't rush anything, but he never ceased to express his desire to see her again. The almost daily calls were a refuge. In those voices interrupted by smiles and silences, Margaret found the promise of something possible, a future that, although uncertain, pulsed with a new strength. 6 months passed like this, between small virtual encounters and the physical distance that seemed the greatest test of that feeling. On a sunny Saturday morning, when Margaret was adjusting the paints on her easel, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. She was surprised. She wasn't expecting visitors that day, much less someone from the past who, even distant, seemed so present in her thoughts. When she opened the door, there he was, Lorenzo, with a bouquet of flowers in his hands and a smile that lit up his face, but still young in the brightness of his eyes. "I couldn't wait any longer," he said, voice choked with emotion. "I wanted to be here, with you." Margaret felt her heart speed up, doubts and fears giving way to a sweet, true joy, a feeling that had crossed oceans and resisted time. "Come in," she invited with a smile mixing surprise, joy, and hope. At that moment, the two worlds that divided her seemed to unite into one. The past that had shaped her, and the future that began to unfold, full of possibilities and light. The sky over Madison seemed to know that day was different. Light streamed through the windows of Margaret's small apartment like a warm, golden, silent embrace. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the delicate scent of lavender. She had sprayed on the couch cushions. There was a sweet anxiety in the air. Lorenzo was there, and for the first time, he would see everything she called my world. During the week they spent together, Margaret took him to every corner of the city, as if she were sharing pages of a handwritten book. She showed him the coffee shop where the baristas already knew her name, the wooden bench in the park where she liked to sit and watch the wind playing in the trees, and the little gallery where she taught her classes, with colorful canvases hanging on the walls and the smell of drying paint in the air. Lorenzo, always attentive, didn't just observe, he absorbed. He touched the surfaces with his fingertips, smiled at the students' paintings as if they were masterpieces, and laughed with youthful enthusiasm at the simple stories she told. It was as if he were painting that new life with her, tone by tone, with eyes and heart. On the last day, Margaret woke up early. She prepared lunch with her own hands, just like she used to on family Sundays. She made rosemary roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and a salad of fresh greens picked from the local market. She insisted on using the white embroidered tablecloth, a family heirloom from her mother, and the set of dishes she had saved for special occasions. This definitely was one. Emily arrived with Michael and the boys shortly before noon. Ethan ran to the door. "Grandma, is he coming today, the man from Italy?" "Yes, my love," Margaret answered, kneeling to kiss his forehead. "He's excited to meet you." When Lorenzo arrived, the air seemed to change. He carried a bouquet of white lilies in his hands, and his honey-colored eyes sparkled with something stronger than admiration. There was tenderness, a kind of serene reverence for everything Margaret was. Michael greeted him politely, a bit wary but respectful. Emily, moved, hugged him sincerely. During lunch, the conversation flowed with laughter, memories, and shared stories between bites. Margaret watched the scene with teary eyes. Her family and that gentle-spirited man sharing the same table, laughing together, as if they had always known one another. Then Lorenzo, still seated, looked at Margaret softly. The room quieted, as if time itself paused. "Margaret," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this week I've lived the most beautiful days my memory holds. I felt your soul in this city, in this home, in everything you do. And even before that, since the first time I saw you on that street in Venice, I knew fate had placed me in front of something rare. You." He stood up, took a small blue velvet box from his pocket, and knelt before her family. "I want to grow old by your side, count the days together, learn your routines and show you mine. I want to hear your laughter every day, and warm your hands on cold mornings. Margaret, will you marry me? Emily brought her hand to her mouth, moved. Caleb clapped without fully understanding. Margaret remained still for a few seconds, as if her heart had stopped to listen to the moment. She rose slowly, her eyes brimming with tears, her face lit like a spring sky. Yes, Lorenzo. Yes, I will. And then, the two embraced as if the world had shrunk to fit into that instant. 2 weeks later, they were in Venice. The wedding was celebrated on a golden autumn afternoon by one of the quieter canals, away from the tourists, where the water gently mirrored the old facades. Margaret wore a light blue dress, simple and elegant, with a lace shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hair was pinned in a loose bun, with small white flowers tucked in. Lorenzo, in a light beige suit, waited for her under a pergola covered in ivy and lit lanterns, his eyes glistening with tenderness. Emily, Michael, the grandchildren, and all her friends, Linda, Carol, Janet, and Susan, were there. The friends wept with emotion. Ethan was the ring bearer and handed over the rings. Caleb dropped petals along the way with the innocent joy of someone who didn't fully understand what was happening, but felt the beauty of the moment. I promise to be your shelter in winter and to dance with you through every spring. Still to come, Lorenzo said, placing the ring on her finger. And I promise that even at 60 I choose to begin everything again with you, Margaret replied, her voice firm and gentle like the sea on a calm day. They kissed under claps and cheers, and in that moment there was no age, no country, no sorrow or past. Only two hearts that had found each other when they were no longer searching. Because it's never too late to begin again. Never too late to love, truly.
If this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours, take a moment to subscribe to the channel right now. Here, every story is crafted to warm your soul and remind you that love can transform everything. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when life surprised you in a way that seemed impossible? Share your story with us in the comments. Let's build a community full of beautiful and inspiring stories. Thank you so much for being part of this emotional journey with me. A big hug, and see you in the next story. I promise it will be even more unforgettable.